think people realise just how vulnerable and how easy manipulated the former royal known as, of course, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, was and remains. This is part and parcel of the bigger problem, something that was very, very quickly established by our late and brilliant monarch of 70 years, Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth. She knew her grandson better than anybody, and she knew also just exactly how manipulative and how persuasive somebody of Meghan Markle's character could be. In today's episode of By Royal Appointment, I want to take you through some of the findings that I found out about that said relationship with the monarch, and more importantly, with Meghan herself. You see, people like to paint this picture that, Meghan and the Queen got on incredibly well. What you actually found was a woman at the very end of her reign who was struggling to come to terms with many changes in her life. You have to remember, and I mean this nicely, but it's the relinquishment, isn't it, of giving over certain aspects of a role that you've had for many years. Even though you're assigning them to the monarch in the future, her son, of course, now King Charles, it's hard to give up. For years, suddenly you've done this job. And suddenly you find out that, well, no, that you can't do that anymore, you need to do this, etc. And I believe this is exactly what, of course, the ex-royals known as the Duke and Duchess of Sussex truly played on. A woman who was struggling, coming to terms with her life, the loss of her husband, and more importantly, trying to appease everybody in the modern world, with the big letter, the big R. Because remember, Meghan pushed very hard by the fact that she was a woman of colour, something that she'd never mentioned and never really used in her own CV to get roles previously, no matter what she says. The moment that she became embroiled with Prince Harry, it became easier, didn't it, to say, I'm a woman of colour. And if you remember, right from the off, she manipulated Harry to put out a message to the media to basically say, back off, this is my relationship, and just because she's a woman of colour, you can't do that sort of thing. Remember, the media were the bad guys from the very beginning. People forget that. What's interesting though is there was really one woman, in my opinion, that knew exactly how Meghan and Harry operated. And she was seen as a big problem in the eyes of Meghan Markle. This is because, if that person could be removed, then Meghan felt she had a direct line to the monarch. Now, as I said, those around Queen Elizabeth at that point still knew that she was very sharp, very together, but with failing health. And the interesting thing about this is, they paint her as a person who was very vulnerable and alone. To a point, yes, but she had a lot of individual strength behind her after many years of dealing with many different crises. But she'd not come up against somebody really like Meghan Markle for years. As she pointed out to an excellent source, I haven't met that sort of person ever since some of Princess Margaret's flighty people from the 60s. The sort of people that she meant. The sort of pushy people that didn't really care for tradition or, whatever you might want to call it, royal protocol. Meghan certainly wasn't going to be doing any of that. She pointed that out very clearly. And as we now know, all thanks, of course, to the niece of the Queen, who pointed out that the Queen was concerned that, in fact, Meghan didn't truly love Prince Harry. Well, she wasn't the only one. Many people around Harry felt that actually Meghan didn't love him. But here's the bigger story behind all of that, and this is, to me, again, where you unravel the box. You see, Harry was so vulnerable, not because of his late mother, simply because of his elder brother, Prince William, more assured, more together, and with a destiny already placed out in front of him. Harry didn't have that destiny, wasn't exactly the brightest bulb, and would openly admit that himself, and had been a party prince. Suddenly he'd found this very enigmatic, good-looking woman who apparently fancied him, and he couldn't believe it. And the telltale sign in that was, if you remember, when they were doing that very first sort of royal tour of duty, a guy in the crowd said, "She is very attractive. You've done well for a ginger." And truly, that's exactly how Harry felt. He'd scored a home goal by bagging Meghan Markle, a so-called Hollywood star, not really, a cable TV actress, but of course in Harry's eyes, superior, better looking, self-assured, and more importantly, a woman who could give him the confidence to move forward, to actually make decisions and not be pushed down. He'd felt all of his life he'd been knocked around and pushed around, and now suddenly there was going to be somebody on his side. He had no idea exactly what he was getting into, but Her Majesty the Queen did. What you will notice with Meghan Markle is she's never really spoken about the Queen in public. She's been discourteous, of course, on a Netflix documentary where she faked the curtsy and Harry looked respectfully embarrassed and didn't really do anything, showing exactly that he'd lost his spine down the back of the sofa. But you see, Meghan knows that she has a big pay deal there, because memories of the Queen, no matter how fanciful, fake, or indeed just completely off the radar they are going to be worth some money. Now, according to a very well-placed source, Meghan Markle says that she has various correspondence from Her Majesty the Queen to her and Harry, which will back up the fact that they had a very strong bond, which was broken by people inside the palace, and they could have been a lot more friendly, but weren't allowed to be. Now, again, this is where this gets interesting, because as I told you, when Meghan Markle was on the train going to Chester with Her Majesty the Queen, the bottom line really was that, in fact, it was the courtiers that had to remind Meghan that, well, basically, it would be courteous to write a thank you letter to Her Majesty the Queen, thanking her for allowing you to be on the royal train, to travel there with it. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Imagine that. It had to be spelled out to someone. So for somebody who's quite prepared to send a card with a fake HRH on, basically saying, here's some jam, the bigger things in life really didn't matter. The other situation that kind of perplexed the Queen, and you can understand this, a woman of her age, right, was, to do what she did at that point takes a lot of admiration. I know people might say I'm biased, but I really liked the Queen. I thought she was great. She did a terrific job as our ambassador and was a wonderful monarch. Never put in a foot wrong, in my opinion. But what was interesting was she went well out of her way to try and make Meghan and Harry feel welcome, comfortable, and more importantly, into the family. And time again, she suggested when Meghan had her mother over in England that perhaps they could, meet, have an informal chat, whatever. And each time this was set up, either Doria was ill, couldn't make it, was too nervous. There was a list of reasons why. Now, this really interested the Queen because, yes, she understood that people might be a little bit perturbed, put out, literally meeting the most famous woman in the world. So the Queen suggested, to make it easier, well, why don't we just go for a wander with the corgis, the dogs? Everybody has a conversation while walking the dogs. There's a nice distraction, all of that sort of thing goes in your favour, right? Oh no, that was shut down as well. And that was part of the argument with Prince Harry, where he became very rude. Because at this point, you see, Her Majesty the Queen realised, and again, I have to say allegedly, that all of this was becoming rather odd. You see, suddenly they found out that Thomas Markle, first and foremost, couldn't walk his daughter down the aisle because he was unsteady on his feet. Felt sorry for him myself, so they decided he could come in at a side door and meet his daughter there. But she didn't want that. Now, you can dress it up any which way you want. In my opinion, she was embarrassed by her father. He didn't fit the narrative. A glamorous person marrying a prince, all of her chums there from Suits, real or not real. No other family members, because I believe, and this is my opinion, that she was embarrassed by her background. Now, this would have been a chance to show that she wasn't embarrassed, even though she'd moved on. But no, suddenly Thomas wouldn't be arriving. So you can understand why Her Majesty the Queen decided to escalate the opportunity to sit down with her mother, or indeed have an informal chat. It was never ever allowed. In fact, the Queen famously pointed out to somebody that she didn't think she'd said more than maybe 10 words to Doria. Likewise, Prince Charles, as he was then, also was called in to say, well, have you had a chat? No. So then what happened was they dragged in Prince Harry and said, look, we really feel we should try and make an effort, because we don't want to appear, if she goes back to America and talks to a magazine, that we're unfriendly. We're trying to be friendly. Help us out here. But apparently Harry said there was nothing to help out. She was perfectly fine. She just didn't necessarily want to be doing that. It wasn't her thing. She was very shy, didn't want it. We didn't necessarily see that, though, did we, at the Beyoncé concerts where she's dancing away in a singlet with her daughter? You get the picture. And the other side of the coin really was this. As I said, Angela Kelly, a very, very bright and clever woman. And according to that source, she advised Her Majesty to sort of leave it. You know, if they wanted to come and make contact with you, then they simply would. And I understood what her narrative was. I could see, yeah, that's her point. You know, why would you have to chase these people? But as I said, it never happened. And then the real turning point, forget all the stuff about the wedding dress and the fact that, you know, she didn't want to be open and come along and share this wonderful experience with Her Majesty the Queen. The fact that she bypassed everybody, speaking to, of course, the Archbishop of Canterbury. This, she claims, was all Harry's fault because he'd never taken her to one side and explained what she was supposed to do. Not true. You see, whenever anybody came forward and said, this is now what we need to do, Meghan either just stared into space, refusing to answer, or would just reply, I'll speak with Harry. And these people were made to feel belittled, frightened, and more importantly, worried about whether she would report back to the Queen saying they weren't supporting her. You get the picture? To give you an idea of just how stupid Meghan Markle was, you know that member of the sort of infamous train journey on the royal train, which is now going to be decommissioned? Well, if you remember, Meghan Markle was very nicely and kindly allowed to travel with the monarch. And when you think about it, this was unprecedented, you know, and this was because the Queen wanted to please Prince Harry. You know, she felt if she opened doors, things could be radically different, and that would cement a better friendship. You see, all the time Harry had pointed out that Meghan was struggling, and this is the key factor that a lot of people also forget. Meghan utilised this mantra to snare Harry. She basically pointed out that she was giving up her world, her life, because if she was going to marry into this, look at what she was giving up. It was never about him, ever about Harry. And this has continued through right to this day. If you don't understand how this works, take a look at this particular situation. When, of course, recently she was doing an interview on one of those podcasts, she openly said, I can't believe just how much that man loves me. She didn't say back. She didn't say, and I love him with all my heart. I couldn't think about operating without him by my side. She said, oh, he's very handsome and he's a fox. But that's all she kind of was willing to say. Very rarely does she say anything complimentary. When she was on the tour, I think in Nigeria or Colombia, she said that's why I married him, you see. He's very bright, patting his ego in public. But in private, all you see is her reaching out, pushing him out the way and making sure that she gets the number one choice. If she wants to meet somebody, she has to go first. We saw that, didn't we, with the Kevin Costner thing and the microphone. Everybody wants to meet and speak to Harry because he's in line, you know, he's a connection to the British monarchy. Of course people are interested. Nobody wants to meet the cable TV actress. She knows it, but she's not having it. She's given up everything for Harry. And this was the sort of thing that he reiterated time and time and time again. Now again, here's where this gets really interesting, because as this went further and further along, and as I said, on the royal train with Meghan and the Queen, this absolutely developed. Meghan was bored, according to a source, who was on the train. She didn't really want to go to Chester or wherever it was. I mean, what was the point of it? You go along and all of that sort of stuff. Her idea was, and many suggested this has been completely 100% backed up, she just was looking at how the monarchy operated so that she could put together a better business plan to present to Her Majesty the Queen. I kid you not. You see, she felt, well, why are we going all the way there? What's the goal of this? And of course, as she famously said on the tour, I believe in Australia, I can't believe so many people have come out and we're not charging them. Well, charging them to do what? But she was influenced by the likes of the Kardashians, who had made billions literally by just turning up and pretending to DJ in a Las Vegas booth or waving to a large group of people, looking nice but not really offering much else. But Meghan felt she could replicate this with the monarchy. As I told you previously, she had big plans for Trooping the Colour. She felt there could be an inner circle that, could get closer to the balcony, perhaps even a competition winner who could come on the balcony to look exactly what other people look. I mean, truly, this was the nutty things that she was coming up with, buoyed on by Prince Harry, because he found her a breath of fresh air. She was suddenly a businesswoman, a tycoon, a mogul, everything that he felt was missing within the royals. What he really meant was he could have some control over this, snatching it away from his elder brother, Prince William, and of course, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Meghan had no time for Catherine. She found her dull, tediously boring. Whatever dress-up she wants to say, that was the bigger picture. And the bigger picture truly was she didn't understand what the role entailed, because, as she claimed, Harry'd never explained it to her. Rubbish, everything was planted out to her. She just didn't want to know, or indeed spend any time with the courtiers, ladies-in-waiting, anybody like that. But as I said, Angela Kelly was the key factor. Now, Angela Kelly's one of these people, as I said, I've met her briefly, very nice woman, northerner, blunt, down to earth, but you know where you stand, and that's a good sign, right? And what I think the Queen liked about Angela Kelly was she treated her the same, didn't dress up, very respectful, very courteous, but actually told her what she needed to hear. And that really was the bigger picture. Of course, somebody like Meghan in this new role didn't certainly want anything like that. That wasn't what she was looking for. And Angela very much had her card marked. We all know that she had to step in and say the "what Meghan wants, Meghan gets" line, or all of that fell apart, if you remember. And so moving forward, what happened then was, and what's now slowly unravelling, and this is now going to be the worst sort of PR for Meghan moving forward, is this. It would appear, you see, that Her Majesty the Queen wasn't the only one that felt she wasn't being connected to what was going to be a new side of the royal family. That's right. No. You see, while the Queen couldn't get anywhere with Doria, or indeed Meghan, and this was an interesting insight from someone who's very close to the Queen, who I spent quite a considerable amount of time with recently. Whenever Meghan had conversations with the Queen, she would deviate from her own. Whatever the Queen asked, it would go back to her, like, with a marvellous portrait of this room, it's so full of history. Anything to actually answer a question. She couldn't be pinned down on anything, you know, the sort of thing. And what was really interesting is the whole thing developed, and it did become difficult and, shall we say, embarrassing, because clearly, as the Queen worked out, Meghan was hiding things. Now, when this was broached with Prince Harry, he just didn't want to know. He felt, and this was part of the argument, again, I have to say allegedly, was that people should just be happy for him and her. They'd found each other. There was just jealousy, sniping. Suddenly he had somebody who he could look after. Now, the story goes, of course, that Meghan had a few issues, hence the reason the marriage had to be, shall we say, moved forward, right? And where this gets interesting again is, even the Queen said to Harry, you know, you really need to take some time out. You're going very quickly. And he pointed out to her that no, he was now in his 30s, it was the right time, and she, of course, would want to have children. So again, this was another point where the Queen felt compelled to give in. Now, make no mistake, MI5, MI6 know everything there is to know about Meghan Markle, and the royal family know that too, right? Make no mistake about that. So in the fullness of time, these things will truly come out. I mean, you know, whatever Harry and Meghan feel they can hide and keep away and make speculative, as we saw recently with that dreadful video with her twerking, and she pointed out on the podcast, remember, this was 4 years ago, and this was just a joyous moment. Pointed out that, you know, against everything that was negative, she could be happy whether they wanted to be or not. But the final twist in the knife as to why Meghan decided the Queen was no longer worth dealing with was when, of course, she decided to revert back, first and foremost to go and live in Canada, and then with her ultimate game plan to go back to California, making pots of jam in Montecito. You see, if you remember, what Meghan wanted to do was be part of that conversation, you know, the Sandringham summit, if you remember. And the idea was that Meghan would dial in on speakerphone, offering her pearls of wisdom to the monarch, the ideas that she got. Now, you know, the story goes, of course, she couldn't travel, etc. But can you imagine that conversation? And I've been told from the person that was there, to the Queen, she wants to have a conversation with me on a speakerphone? No, that was never going to be allowed. But even at the 11th hour, right? Even at that 11th hour, Harry was still pushing, saying that he only felt it could be concluded if Meghan was included. Apparently the Queen said, well, then she should have made the effort to come, or we can delay it. But of course, Harry wasn't having any of that either, and neither was Meghan. So consequently, at that point, according to the source, that's when Meghan decided that in fact the Queen was going to become rather troublesome and difficult, because obviously she was the person that everybody loved. And that's the reason why, as I've said, you don't hear Meghan speaking about her at all. There's a book there. She's told people there's a book there. She has rare insight into the conversations with the Queen, standing on the balcony, going on the royal train, mixing privately with her. She has memories, apparently, that people would pay highly to have revealed. So you can see there's always an underlying threat. Now, back to this revelation, of course, from the Queen's cousin, who basically pointed out that everybody knew already that Meghan wasn't necessarily in love with Prince Harry. But as she pointed out to someone, love develops, doesn't it? Now, you have to remember, Meghan all along has pointed out that she was the one being chased. She was the one giving up her fabulous career, and she was the one giving up everything to marry this prince. And that Harry, even if you remember literally on the engagement video, she still played it very cool, slipping up only once when Harry basically pointed out that he'd hardly got the words out before she'd said yes. She wasn't going to let this slip out of her hands. And the moment that she said yes, everything changed in her favour. She still kept on the publicist, the agent, the acting, casting people. She kept them all on because she was not 100% sure that even she could pull it off. But by removing the obstacles in the way of family, her father, keeping her mother on side, and more importantly, as she pointed out, eventually winning the Queen over. And as she also told her source, you see, you have to remember, we are the future now, meaning, of course, her and Harry. They were going to be totally different, the way that they ran the monarchy. She seemed to forget that there were already two people in place to run the monarchy. You get the picture. So moving forward now, while people say, did Meghan Markle ever truly love Harry after what the Queen famously now said? The answer would be, I believe Meghan Markle does love Prince Harry. She certainly loves everything that comes with it. She certainly loves the power, the fame, the intrigue, the speculation, the daily talk about her. But the problem is, it boils down to one thing. It's a popularity contest. That's the one thing that Prince Harry got right about the monarchy. And popularity comes at a price, and you have to work for it. But you see, according to Harry, Meghan Markle is a reincarnation of Princess Diana. And she was world-liked and world-loved. Meghan, that wouldn't be only a matter of time, wouldn't it? How difficult would it be for her to emulate his mother? 5 years down the line, what he's finding is his whole world is unraveling. Meghan's still bashing out pots of jam and flogging out cheap wine, three bottles a time. But of course, the pinnacle, the biggest moment of her life, is now well and truly past. And the only thing sellable that she now has is not her time in Suits or those low-grade TV shows like Deal or No Deal. It's just her association with the most famous woman in the world. And when you think about it, the way that she and Harry treated this monarch, this wonderful icon of our times, really is, in many people's eyes, absolutely appalling. Anybody else agree? As ever, thank you so much for joining me for a very special bi-royal appointment. Glad you like the flowers. If you can, please do like and share and comment respectfully. And as ever, until next time, take care of yourself.